Optimize risk responses, principle number 10. I believe this is one of the most understandable, easy to relate principle for project leaders. It's all about optimizing the handling of risk. Now, what is risk? In our project management or PMI terminology, the risk is an uncertain event which has an impact, a positive or a negative possible impact on your project objective. Now, here things becomes little tricky. In a PMI's language, even the positive impact event is also called risk. Many times we call it an opportunity, but in an overall lingo we use a term risk. So, risk which are positive in nature are opportunities, risks which are negative in nature, which means the impacts are negative on project outcomes or project objective, we call them threats. So, overall as a project leader we need to ensure that we are managing, optimizing the risk responses. Now, how do we look into the details of the risk? Overall, as a project leader, I need to ensure that I am continually evaluating exposure to the risk, both opportunities and threats. So, which means both positive and negative risk, and I need to maximize the positive impact and minimize the negative impact, which is a pretty obvious things on the project and its outcome. So, the organization and the project are operating in the uncertain environment. We cannot know everything, and we can see in our principles that's the theme. Things are happening, things are changing, the complexities are emerging as we are progressing in our project. Now, risk which you have identified may occur, may not occur, but this is something which you need to plan for. So, various uncertain event which can probably happen, that is why you are worried about them, and you as a project leader, as a project team should have some approach for handling, managing or kind of isolating those events so that project objective can be protected. Overall, I need to ensure that I achieve or maximize my project outcomes. So, usually the term project risk exposure is discussed. So, what is project risk exposure? So, the project has various risk, various uncertainties, positive, negative. Overall, when we total sum all the positive and negative risk, what is the overall risk exposure is coming? Many times your project stakeholder wants to ensure that overall project risk exposure should be agreed upon. The stakeholder should know that okay, this is what we are taking in the expectation of the benefits, and it should be communicated and continuously evaluated. The idea here is risk cannot be identified once. You can't just quantify and understand the exposure of a risk at once. Various risks get re-evaluated frequently. That's what the continually is important, because the external environment is changing, the internal environment is changing, your understanding is also evolving. So, based on your modified understanding and latest information of your environment, we evaluate the risk exposure, and we also see the individual risk exposure coming together, totaling up, and we also evaluate the overall project risk exposure. So, it is expected to be kept in mind that we are revisiting the risk calculation frequently. Now, there are terms which are used in order to understand stakeholder expectation. When it comes to risk, it is too much related with the stakeholders. See, as a project leader, you are taking some project path. The project path has an uncertainty attached to it. Those uncertainties should be agreed upon, and the amount of variability that uncertainty can bring, maybe on the cost side, maybe on the compliance side, maybe on the scheduling side, should be agreed upon with the stakeholders. So, in order to do that, we can talk about things like risk appetite. So, risk appetite is a term which is used to demonstrate a degree to which an uncertainty can be taken. Yeah. So, if I say that I want to take a high risk appetite, which means the stakeholders are willing to take high amount of variability for a given area. If we say I have a low risk appetite, I can say that I am taking less amount of variability to that particular project objective or that particular area. Many times the risk appetite is also explained with the help of risk threshold. So, risk threshold is a more specific quantified on a given project objective. So, we can say for a given project objective, we can have 5 to 10% risk threshold, which means that up to 5 to 10% things can go wrong. Say I am focusing on cost, so stakeholder may agree to have a plus minus 5% cost risk related threshold. So, any things which are impacting on project outcome related to the cost, plus minus 5% is something acceptable. The other stakeholder for other project, this could be a plus minus 10%. So, we can say the high risk threshold demonstrate high risk appetite, the low risk threshold demonstrate low risk appetite. So, it can be it's easy to say, it's fair to say that risk threshold is something which measures or quantify the risk appetite in a more concrete terms. So, when as a project leader I am working with a stakeholder, I need to understand their risk appetite. I gradually find out the risk threshold which can be worked upon, and overall with the help of calculating individual risk exposures, I should be helping them in knowing the overall project risk exposure as well. And as a project leader, I have a goal that I need to continuously focusing on increasing or maximizing the opportunities, the positive risks, and minimizing the threats which are negative risk. Now, some guidelines related to how should we handle risk responses. Again, here we are at a principle level, we are not yet talking about things like risk register and etc., etc. Those are how part of risk which will come at a due course in time. Here we are focusing on the overall top level guidelines, so it can work in the various contexts, be it agile way of working, be it a non-agile way of working. That is why we are keeping this discussion at a very, very high level. So, few guidelines about risk responses. We are saying we need to apply the risk responses appropriate for the significance of the risk, which means if the risk is significant, big, we probably need to apply the risk responses also accordingly. If the risk is less significant, probably we should not put our lot of project management activities into it, because doing responses also involves time and energy. So, you need to apply appropriately as per the significance of the risk. Now, how do you identify the significance? Again, you need to understand the risk appetite and risk thresholds depending upon how stakeholder looks at particular thing. It should be cost effective. Whenever you are applying risk responses, you should see that your response should not cost you more than a risk, then you are definitely not doing the right thing. It should be realistic within the project context. We should not be just dreaming about that we will do something like this. It should fit into the overall project context, very obvious, should be agreed by relevant stakeholder. As you understand, its overall risk responses should always be in consultation with the project stakeholders, customers, and should be owned by a responsible person. Many times this responsible person could be a project leader, project manager, but it could be anyone. We can say that we should have some good amount of ownership associated with risk responses. So, someone should be owning it, that okay, I will get this particular thing done. So, overall we should keep in mind that yes, there could be a positive and negative risk. As a project team, we should be always vigilant towards identifying new risk, towards identifying the exposure of the current risk, towards identifying the effectiveness of our risk responses. We do it by way of various lesson learned, our retrospective meetings, and based on them we improve our risk responses, we keep our stakeholder informed, and that is overall this principle talks about.